Welcome to this edition of the Iowa Blog. I'm your host, Craig Wynn. This is a Saturday, the 30th day of August, 2025. In our program last night, we made considerable progress through the book of Daniel in the 8th chapter. And we reached a point where we were detailing the life of Alexander and those who would replace him based upon what the testimony revealed about these characters, recognizing that the man called Alexander the Great was really a revolting individual. He was a drunkard late in his life. He was incredibly licentious. He was really just a questionable character. He enslaved countless people. He pursued people with a wrath and vengeance that is nearly demonic in his nature. Yes, he appeared to have made many good calls and battles, to have prevailed as a warrior, but he didn't contribute much of anything else to the world, and all in all, he was a net negative. But nonetheless, it's important to know that story and know how egotistical men like Alexander shape history, because we're dealing with one now in Donald Trump. So as we dig deeper into what Daniel was shown, we reach an otherworldly transition. The subject is no longer men running amok, but instead the spirit driving the worst of them to madness. And I suspect this is because Alexander the Not-So-Great was a consummate foil through whom we can view the great betrayer of the time of troubles. Now, I say this because the corporeal manifestation of Satan will be devilish, notoriously egotistical, and infamously ruthless. He, like all psychopaths, will have no empathy, just as was the case with Alexander. And he will not care about anyone other than himself. He will be merciless, and he will be murderous, and he will claim heaven and earth as his own. Therefore, while the horrid image of Alexander and his henchmen are seared into our memories, God is using this opportunity to introduce the most ruthless villain ever to prey on his people. And if you want more of the life and times of Muhammad, I skipped through about 20 pages of material here just to get back to the testimony that is recorded in Daniel more expediently. But it's in a book that will soon be published on Bashar Herald, Coming Home 4. So into the tour from our past that takes us into the future. We are confronted with something Yahweh revealed in the midst of his preeminent declaration regarding Satan. And that presentation, as we know, is in Yeshaya, Isaiah 14. When compared to what we're about to read here in Daniel 8, it affirms that this goat who drew his last breath in Babylon was an exemplar for Satan's corporeal manifestation in the last days. Indeed, the beast that took root within the walls of Babylon by commingling religion and politics, which then enticed Persia and lured in the Greeks, would be personified in Rome, developing into the Roman Catholic Church. And through it all, its God was none other than the snake in the garden. This realization regarding the Torahless One is so essential to our understanding his nature, his purpose, his identity. We will turn to Yeshaya 14, and we will follow the great prophet, as he explains all of this to us momentarily, because there is a very interesting twist in that story that very few people have come to recognize. And that is that Satan wasn't trying to position himself above the Most High. He was trying to position himself as God's son, as the Messiah, as the former and returning king, as Yahweh's chosen, as though David. So the Spirit now manifest in this monstrous beast like Alexander, who served as the role model, exalted himself above the Most High. Also consistent with what we're told in Yeshaya, Hillel ben Shakar, as is his name, means that he radiated light as the son of the rising sun. He was an arrogant one, modeled after the reverence for the sun, which is germane to Christianity, to Judaism, and of course to Islam. It does not fall alone, but it takes a considerable number of the heavenly host with him. Revolution is the one that says a third, but it isn't specified, and so we don't know, and it isn't even germane for us to know how many of the Malak decided to follow the Karub, known as Hillel ben Shakar. But the great betrayer of Israel in the last days will have a cadre of enablers, and he's going to need them. He has very serious health problems, and he is 79 years old, and he will be 87 by the time this is all over. And it is clear that for him to last that long, as we're talking about Donald Trump, he is likely to be, as the prophet declares him, wheelchair bound, but really gaudy, fancy wheelchair, of course, and that he will have to be invigorated by the very spirit that is enabling his demonic duplicity. It's a funny thing that today the number one trending story was that Trump was dead. Now, that would be a difficult one for us to explain, since I've identified Trump as the corporeal manifestation of Hasatan. He is the great betrayer of the last days. And so he's going to need to stay alive for a while longer to fulfill that particular designation. And of course, the calls about his death were premature. He went off to play golf today. And so, as I said, the calls of his death were not up to par. Now, one final note. Ruach spirits in Hebrew are feminine, even though we consider Satan, who is one of them, to be masculine. So when speaking of this wayward spirit, I have chosen to use it as opposed to she, because in the translation from one language to another, she just doesn't fit our ears. And it was exalted as great. It was magnified in importance, while insolent and arrogant, promoted, praised, and elevated well beyond the host of the heavens, or even a lofty army. Shabbat Shamayim, a vast array of implements and messengers of the spiritual realm or sky from Saba to go forth willing to battle on behalf of and serve. But then it was brought down. It fell from a higher place to a diminished position to the earth as part of the host of the spiritual realm, along with some of the brightest luminaries and heavenly powers. And it tread upon them and trampled them as the aggressor among them. So this is Daniel 8:10. Now, Satan was apparently the most exalted, certainly one of the most exalted of the heavenly host. And as such, he was selected and dispatched to earth to serve as Hasatan, the adversary, which is the alternative to God. But he did not come alone, but instead with an unspecified number of Malachim, spiritual beings, and they would include some of the best and brightest among the vast array of incorporeal messengers. And in conclusion, it also appears that Hasatan was like Trump, and that he did not play well with others, even those who were associated with him. He turned upon and he bullied. Can't trust the devil. Who would have guessed? The reason for these insights at this time is just as the corporeal manifestation of the adversary has been exalted as the Lord of religion, Alexander was the prototype for men being perceived as gods. His name was almost always followed by the Great. In this way, the Macedonian tyrant who slaughtered his way to infamy and sought to be worshipped as a god serves as exemplar for the Antichrist. Now, no mortal will ever have autonomy over Yahweh Saba, vast array of spiritual implements. Therefore, the inference here is that the beast who came down to earth with these Malak was one of them, and likely the Karub in the garden. Now, recognizing this, our determination of the identity of this individual who is now possessed by Satan, and I'm talking about this corporeal manifestation who we've identified as Donald Trump, is enhanced by realizing that they will share many traits that are common. And this is one of them. We will turn to Yeshaya 14 in a moment and consider more of them, but the fact of the matter is Hasatan and his corporeal manifestation, Donald Trump, have a great deal in common. They're both psychopaths. They're both without empathy. They are both exceedingly narcissistic. They are both duplicitous. And there is very little correlation between what they believe and what they say and reality. And they actually despise humankind. So when we do these things, and we're going to find ourselves in a place where the reference to Kokab, those considered stars in this time of darkness, the seemingly best and brightest, the most illustrious and empowered, are going to be in the fall sent down, and Satan's not going to go quietly into the night. In fact, most English Bible translations, slavishly parodying the familiar phrasing of the King James Version, present the impossible. They say that the beast waxed so great that his ego brought down the stars to the earth. What they fail to consider is that not only that spiritual beings are comprised of light, therefore their heads don't bump into things. We have long used stars as metaphors to describe the best and brightest among us. The most famous and influential. It's a metaphor. With this revelation, we know that neither Satan nor the Torahless one operate alone. And this was done with Alexander and then Rome, Paul and his church. These beastly blowhards are aided and abetted by demons, both literal and figuratively. Before we go back in time to understand what lies before us in our future, I'd like to share a couple of additional thoughts. The reason that Yahweh has described the beast's legacy of institutionalized religion beginning in Babylon, and then explained how it was used to inspire the leaders governing empires evolving from it, is that he wants us to appreciate how Hasatan expresses himself in the psyche of those who lead nations and empires. The vestige of horrible behavior we chronicled in the life of Alexander and then Rome demonstrates why we are best served to forego religion and politics, patriotism and militarism. The history of these beasts is the story of civilization and the consequence of man pursuing Satan's agenda, all to plunder, to enslave, to deceive, and to kill. Although those characteristics seem exceedingly Islamic, don't they? Plunder, enslavement, deception, and murder. Many, if not most, of the leaders that we have chronicled up to this point sought to be worshipped as if they were gods. And so, in their murderous deeds and egocentric ambitions, we find a microcosm of Satan's persona and his cravings, and to come to know that the Torahless one of our day is going to be very similar to them. Now, with two men in particular, Paul and Muhammad, we come face to face with the characteristics that define this great abuser of men. They were both, admittedly, by their own confession, demon-possessed. And they devoted their lives to advancing Satan's agenda. They confused billions, tens of billions between them. As the devil's advocates, they were deceitful, conniving, egotistical, manipulative, covetous, and sexually perverted. This goat, Alexander, is a particularly telling exemplar of the beast. He proclaimed himself son of Amun, the king of kings, the master of the universe. He was an absolute dictator who sought to control the world through force. Those who sought to defy his wishes or rebel against his influence were enslaved or exterminated. Death and destruction were his constant companions. His family was conniving, paranoid, and dysfunctional. And in this world, the military, the government, and the religion, even the caste system of economic schemes, they were all integrated. They were all inseparable. They were all imposed by Muhammad and his ilk, as well as by Alexander. And let's not forget the condescending ego. In modern times, Trump would be his lone rival, if we're talking Alexander, as an imposing narcissist and relentless psychopath. Now, just as the previous statement leveraged the past to address our future, and the arrival of the corporeal manifestation of Hasatan, the adversary, during the time of Israel's troubles, so too is what follows. It reads, and up to a point, the empowered leader of this host of spiritual beings will be exalted and glorified, honored, and considered great. So, because of him, the constant and enduring will be forcefully lifted up, and they will be caused to be raised. Then the sight and establishment of his consecration and sanctification, also his sanctuary, his shrine or temple, will be forcibly overthrown and tossed away, compelled to be cast off and hurled into oblivion. That's quite a statement, isn't it? It's Daniel 8:11. And like so many words comprising it in the Hebrew lexicon, we find here Ad, Sar, Saba, and Gadal. And the fact is that all four of these words can be positive. They can convey a neutral situation or attitude, and they can be decidedly negative, such that context becomes the determining factor. So while I would say that the juxtaposition of Ad and Sar indicate the rise of the Antichrist, this figure that we have labeled as such. He is the great betrayer. He is the adversary's advocate. He is going to be thwarted ultimately by the role played by the restoring witness serving the king being Dowd. And I think that this statement, like the previous one, is therefore describing this conflict and therefore pertains to this corporeal manifestation of Hasatan. And it is the Ruach of Satan which has been Gadol, exalted and magnified as the God of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. He is the Lord of the earth and worshipped as Jesus, as Hashem, as Adonai, and as Allah. And he and his fellow fallen Malach were among the brightest in Shamaim. But their duplicitous role is to push everyone down, including those who are associated with them. The only silver lining here is that his glorification was written in the perfect conjugation, telling us that it will soon come to an end. In this prophetic pronouncement, the first of the three statements seems to indicate that Satan's corporeal manifestation will declare that he is God. So to spare the covenant family from this outage, once again, this outrage, I should say, we should once again find Yahweh removing his children to be consistent, would we not? In the previous use of ha-temed, the constant and enduring, were to be sure, taken away and removed. This time they are they are lifted up and raised. This is our Heavenly Father honoring his promise to protect his family on Shabuah, the promise of 7 Shabbats. The timing is also important because this is when the Torahless one is slated to eviscerate Israel, making the nation indefensible through the so-called two-state, I don't even want to say solution, we'll say dissolution. With the third sentence within this prophecy, we're brought forward in time to Teruah, the harvest after Shabuah, the day of the herald, when the dreams of the devil and his denizen, well, they will be squashed. All that they sought to establish with their gaudy and grandiose shrines to their ego, this sanctuary to Satan will be overthrown and they will be cast off into oblivion. Therefore, God is revealing that the spirit of Satan within the Torahless one will be esteemed by the preponderance of people, particularly Israel. To a greater extent than Germans venerated Hitler, he will be glorified. He's going to be worshipped because he will be perceived to be the ultimate warrior and peacemaker, a savior in God. His status among men and his acclaim among nations will be unbridled, unrestrained, up to the moment that, well, it is not. And that doesn't mean that he's going to be respected. It just means that people will kowtow to him out of fear that, well, he becomes exceedingly aggressive. Once again, it would be inappropriate to extrapolate to the extent that English Bible translations have done. They render Tamid as if the continuation of the offerings and sacrifices will be taken away. But this not only implies that the sacrifices will have been resumed, which will not be the case, but it takes our attention away from Yahweh's Mikre, which the Torahless one, along with Christians, Muslims, and Jews, have long since disavowed. They haven't disavowed taking them away. They've disavowed Yahweh's Moed Mikre, the core of Yahweh's plan of salvation. They have disavowed. And you might say, well, it's not Judaism. They're celebrating the end of their year now in a holy month that isn't even mentioned in the Torah. They're claiming that the 6th month is the end of their year. They have replaced Teruah. They call it Rosh Hashanah, which is a Babylonian name, head of the year. They celebrate Kippurim, not as the day of reconciliations. They even call it Kippur. They don't realize that Yahweh always writes it in the plural. And they, in the religious, twirl chickens over their head, tormenting them. It is a day of affliction as opposed to a day of reunion. They have no concept that we are returning to the conditions experienced in Eden during Sukkah, and that we camp out with Yahweh because they don't even know his name. And if you were to start at the beginning of the year, they have convoluted Pesach into freedom from slavery in Egypt when it is no such thing. It opens the doorway to life. Separation from the torment of Mitzrayim is possible because of matzah, when our guilt is removed from us, particularly religious and political guilt. And they have no concept also of Bikurim, which is firstborn children, because it brings us into the covenant. They would rather celebrate Purim and days like Hanukkah than they would pay attention to Yahweh's testimony. And there really is no veneration for Shabuah among religious Jews. So they have disavowed Yahweh's calendar and his annual meetings, just as have all Christians, just as have all Muslims, just as have all Marxists. They are practiced by very few people. I would say very close to 1 in a million today. Honor Yahweh's invitations to meet as he distinguished them. Now, as an interesting aside, rabbis and pastors alike are all a Twitter over finding and sacrificing red heifers in accordance with the discussion that is presented in Bamidbar, Numbers 19. But they don't know that the red heifer is actually a man, or that he willingly offers his life on Teruah to restore the mortal remnant of Yisrael before the return of father and son. Fact is, they don't know that Teruah represents the opportunity to come home, that it is this day where this mortal remnant of Yisrael is purged, no longer serving as the metaphor of the adulterous woman. And it is the time to resolve the issues of the waters of Meribah, with Numbers 5 and Numbers 20 explaining what needs to be accomplished. Now, these things known, when we rely upon the primary definitions of each word, this is what Daniel actually wrote. And it was exalted. It's now speaking of this corporeal manifestation of Hasatan. And it was exalted as great and magnified in importance, well beyond the host of the heavens. But then it was brought down to the earth as part of the host of the spiritual realm, along with some of the brightest luminaries in the heavenly powers, and yet it tread upon them and trampled them down as the aggressor among them. Daniel 8:10. And up until a point, the empowered leader of this host of spiritual beings will be exalted and glorified, honored and considered great. So because of him, the constant and unceasing, who are continuously enduring, will be lifted up and raised. Then the sight, establishment, and implications of what he is consecrating and sanctifying, even his sanctuary, a shrine or temple, will be forcibly overthrown and tossed away, compelled to be cast off and hurled into oblivion. This is a reasonable summary of what God just revealed to us, that being Daniel 8:11. Now, these things known, I'm personally at a loss to explain why the King James Version, the New American Standard Bible, and the New Living Translation propose that wa men hu ha tamed rum somehow conveys By him the daily sacrifice was taken away. Or, and by it removed the regular sacrifice from him. Or, in the case of the Nilt, by canceling the daily sacrifices offered to him. They're out of their mind. There are no daily sacrifices that are going to be offered to Hasatan and his corporeal manifestation, Donald Trump. He's not going to stop regular sacrifices because guess what? There are no regular sacrifices. They're out of their mind, and there is no word in that group, Min, Hu, Ha, Tamid, room, that conveys sacrifice. Not one. Why did they all write sacrifice when there isn't the word for sacrifice in the text? I don't mean to wear you down with all of these explanations, but instead to equip you to conduct your own analysis. It is important for you to know that there are often many options available to us, and therefore different renderings are often possible. And in this case, the word patterns are deliberately challenging because God didn't want anyone to understand this until it was time when we needed to understand it, and that time is now. So these prophecies would remain unresolved and unsolved over the centuries. Now, in this light, here's the next riddle to unravel. By way of introduction, the last three verbs, gadal, which means exalted, room, rise, and shalach, overthrown, were all scribed in the third person masculine singular, which would be he. And of the preceding nouns, Saba, Shamaim, Eretz, Kokab, Sar, Temed, Makom, and Makosh, all but Eretz, land, are masculine. So curiously, however, each of the verbs in this next statement, Nathan, which means to give, Shalach, which means to cast, Ashah, which means to act, and Shalach, which is to be empowered, were written in the third person feminine singular, which is she. Therefore, neither the Tamid, the enduring, nor the Shaba, host, can serve as the feminine subjects of these verbs, nor can Pesha, revolt. Now, this leaves us with an unidentified feminine subject, such as potentially the Ruach, spirit, or the Emeth, the truth, or the Eretz, land. Now, adding to the complexity, in this Nifl stem, where the subject carries out and also receives the action of the verb, which is a gift, Nathan, to give, it can be rendered as she will give or she will be given. These things known, here's my interpretation of the text. She will be given, Nathan. She will promote this offering being presented and bestowed, Nephil imperfect. She will pursue and receive this gift with ongoing consequences throughout time, over to the continually persistent and enduring Al-Ha-Tamid, to those who are constant and unrelenting. It's a masculine noun. A host of spiritual implements, Saba, a vast array of envoys and messengers now engaged in battle, also masculine, because of the Pesha, rebellion, through this defiance and revolt. Pesha is also masculine. And she will cast Shalach, so she will throw out the Hiphil imperfect, where she will cause truth to serve as a reflection or extension of herself into perpetuity, such that it is perceived as trustworthy and reliable to the land. And she will respond, acting and engaging, and she will succeed pursuant to being empowered and prospering. But for a while, she will be victorious and useful, but in the perfect conjugation, there will be a limit of time. So, given the choice, I think in this case, one of the most interesting possibilities is to capitalize she such that she is Yahweh's Ruach, given the Tamid, the enduring, as a Saba, a host of spiritual messengers as a result of Pasha, this rebellion. This makes sense for a number of reasons. First, the covenant family members will be inheriting the responsibility of guiding the mortal remnant of Yisrael into and through the millennial celebration of Sukkah. We will need their help. Second, there will be a countless array of Pesha, defiant and revolting souls, which we will be given the responsibility of judging, convicting, and sentencing. And the Malak are perfectly suited to collect the perpetrators, keep their souls restrained, present the evidence against them, carry out the appropriate punishments, and then take them off to Sheol. And third, the covenant's children grow and become ever more like our Father. So it's only right that he trust us with managing these Malak as we carry out our responsibilities and explore the possibilities throughout the universe at this time. Now, while I would have preferred that Daniel chose a verb more in keeping with the process than shalak, cast, especially since the object is a myth truth, we are best served to perceive she as the Ruach spirit again. This is because in the Hiphil imperfect, the truth becomes an extension of herself into perpetuity. And as we have learned with Yeshaya's portrayal of the seven spirits of Yahweh associated with the Choder, the Ruach is truth personified. Also, since the Malak are Yahweh's spiritual messengers, it's only natural that a Shaba, host of them, would flood the Eretz land and earth with that which is verifiable and true. At this point, it makes some sense to perceive that the Eretz, which is a recipient of the Emeth, will then respond appropriately, making the she associated with Asha engaging people of the earth. The remnant of the land then becomes the subject of Shalak, enrichment and empowerment. Therefore, I think that these assessments are fitting because of the transition from Daniel 10, which is demonic, to Daniel 11, which is a blend of good guys and bad guys. Under this scenario, it makes sense for Daniel 11 to be a celebration of happily ever after. Now, this known, we must remain aware that at the present time anyway, Hillel ben Shakar, as he is introduced in Isaiah 14, is in control over a very rebellious Saba, host of spiritual beings. And while misled, they will continue to misappropriate and twist Yahweh's Torah and Nabi, his prophets, in order to support Satan's agenda, which is to be worshipped. To appreciate Satan's approach, we must go back in time to consider how he seduced Chawa. She is the actual name of the individual that was with Adam in the garden. There was no one named Eve. And we should do this because the same ploy was deployed by Paul in the Christian New Testament. And it's the same ploy that the Torahless one of the last days will use. Rabbis also use it, particularly Akiba and Maimonides. They do so to rehash the Talmud arguments to corrupt God's Torah message. It is the approach Yahweh denounced throughout Isaiah, explaining the consequence of it to us with the expectation that we would use the resulting insights to avoid satanic entanglements, i.e., religion and politics, patriotism and conspiracy, militarism, and caste economic systems. So after Satan misquoted something Yahweh had conveyed, Chawa took the poisoned bait and she ran with it, adding her own interpretations and her embellishments. Their intent was to invert reality and elevate a myth about that which was created, such that the people and the Malak were perceived as gods. But why? God is on record offering us everything we could possibly desire. He has provided the means to perfect us and to make us immortal. He has promised to adopt us, enriching, empowering, and enlightening us to the extent that we become infinitely superior to any and every god that mankind has ever conceived. So what's the advantage of them? Join the covenant. You'll be infinitely superior to the myth of Jesus Christ. Won't even have to pick up your cross. Now, as the covenant's children, we will inherit the material and the spiritual realms. A couple of trillion galaxies out there, folks. Now, that's everything that exists. And then for good measure, Yahweh will teach us how to create a new universe of our own making. So even if it were possible for us to become divine, and it's not, nothing would be gained by becoming a rival god. Further, being God happens to be the most difficult job in the universe, and it is largely disappointing as a result of his creation continually disavowing him, even worshiping human constructs, instead of engaging in a familial relationship as he designed and intended for us. So Satan, to his credit, has been very good at being bad. Up to this point, relatively few have chosen Yahweh over Hasatan. If it were a popularity contest, the adversary has won by a Trumpian landslide. And that is likely as God intended. Indeed, the very reason for creating and deploying the serpent. Yahweh wants a family, and he wants those who are in his family to be intelligent and thoughtful, loyal and rational. He's not looking for an empire. He doesn't want a religion. So driving this point home, Satan misleads through babble, confounding people by intermixing truth with deception and commingling religion and politics. He prevails through misappropriating, misconstruing, and misquoting the Torah and the prophets, twisting and perverting God's message. Some jobs are just there because they need to be done. And so rather than coming up with a original paradigm, Hasatan and his minions use half-truths. They promote counterfeits. And there's no greater, more damaging counterfeit than Jesus. Second on to that would be Bar Kokhba. They are both false messiahs. Satan's mythology is similar to that in an Escher print, if you've ever seen one of those, with an infinite metamorphosis twisting reality to pervert our perspective. Right becomes left, and up is down, as is the case in Satan's agenda, where reality is spun around and it's inverted with clever reproductions of familial patterns. The adversary's favorite medium is religion, far and away, although he is also surprisingly effective in academia and philosophy, conspiracy, patriotism, politics, restrictive economic schemes, and within the military. His most vocal advocates up to this point have been Paul and Muhammad, followed by Titus and Hadrian, Akiba and Maimonides, Constantine and Eusebius, then Theodosius. Most recently, Marx and Huxley, Hitler and Stalin, and of course today, Donald Trump. Satan's minions are summoned by the titles of Pope and Prime Minister, Rabbi and Imam, Pastor and Priest, as well as Mr. President. So in this next pronouncement, the Echad Kodash, the one set apart, must be Elia, who is among Yahweh's two witnesses during this time of trouble. He is asking a man identified as the Palmoni, one who intervenes and delivers salvation in an exceptional way, to address a series of issues. He wants him to explain the duration and extent of this vision, pertaining to the constant and enduring, as well as the devastating and desolating rebellion that is transpiring at this time, particularly as it prompts the set apart and heavenly host to ponder the implications of worldwide subjugation and oppression. Therefore, the Palmoni is either Dode or Yada. Only two men provide salvation for God's people. They are the only two individuals uniquely prepared to intercede and deliver humankind from their guilt and harm's way. They are both confident and judgmental, and the most distinguishing factor is that their sacrifices on Pesach and Teruah are used by Yahweh in miraculous ways to save his people. And while Dode is obviously the greater between them, and his sacrifice on matzah carries away all manner of religious and political guilt, and the Adama Paraz, Yada's sacrifice on Teruah, resolves inadvertent guilt, being misled versus misleading. They are both powerful influences over souls. And while Dode is obviously the most important, as I have mentioned, it is Yada's sacrifice at this time that God uses to resolve the current crisis of rebellion, because it must end now for there to be a homecoming on Yom Kippurim. So here's the text as it is translated for you. Then I choose to listen intently, and I heard Wa Shama. Of my own free will, I decided to pay very close attention to what was being said, because of the genuine and ongoing implications of what I heard. Call, imperfect, paragogic, cohortative. That's a mouthful, isn't it? Call stem means we interpret this call to listen genuinely and as an authentic plea to listen. Imperfect means that he would do so habitually and there would be ongoing implications of what he heard. Paragogic, creates a sense of emphasis for all of this. This was important. And the cohortative is an expression of first-person volition. So then I chose to listen intently, and I heard Echad Kodesh, one who is set apart. Echad means one. That's what Echad means. Kodesh means set apart. That is what Kodesh means. So this is one who is special and distinct. He is prepared and devoted. And he is speaking. So then I chose to listen intently, and I heard Echad Kodash, one who is set apart, speaking, Dabar, communicating, using words and language. Peel participle, masculine singular. The object is influenced by the dramatic and impassioned nature of the message being conveyed by this individual. The Echad Kodesh, the set apart one, asked the Palmoni, the one who intervenes and delivers salvation in an exceptional way. La Ha Palmoni, to the one uniquely prepared to intercede and save, in whom we can be confident in considering, from Palal, to intervene, to intercede, to be judgmental, Pala, to be distinct, separated, distinguished, set apart, exceedingly uncommon, Palet, to safely deliver and save, and Pala, in a uniquely exceptional and even miraculous way. And Ma, pondering those implications, concluding with On, which speaks of all things pertaining to any of this, with the Ani Y Yod conclusion, making this our Palmoni. The set apart one asked the Palmoni to speak as a restoring witness, to explain the extent and duration of this prophecy to be perceived, pertaining to the unrelenting overall continuance and duration of the destruction and revolting rebellion, of the deadly and devastating criminal defiance, and of this causing the set apart and the heavenly host to ponder the implications of those being trampled by oppression, subjugation, and persecution. Daniel 8:13. Boy, is there a lot to unpack here, and I must begin with an apology. We presented this statement a number of weeks ago, and because Palmoni has this sound that is similar to My Little Pony, my wife said, "Oh, you're my little Palmoni," and we all had a good laugh. And I particularly made fun of myself using it, saying that being called the Palmoni was likely a response to me saying that I could best him when it comes to the design of the platypus, because my platypus would have the feathers of a colorful bird and would fly. But I owe him an apology. There's nothing cute about the Palmoni. The Palmoni is the savior of God's people. The Palmoni lays down his life to give life to Israel. And so this is an exceedingly important title. The Palmoni is one who intervenes, who delivers salvation. And the Palmoni does so in an exceptional way. This individual is exceedingly important to God's people at this time. So the set apart one. This is a very unique individual. There are only two candidates that could have been having this discussion before Daniel at this moment. There are two individuals who are uniquely set apart. The most set apart, the Kodesh, from Yahweh's perspective, is his beloved son, the one he chose, our Messiah and King, David. And he appears numerous times before Daniel in Babel to reveal the most important aspects of these prophecies. And He is called Gabriel, which means God's most courageous and capable man. And as we know, Dod is Yahweh's Kodesh, most set apart. But there is another man who plays a role in all of this, and his name is Elia. He is exceedingly unique. He is the one person that Yahweh harvested and brought home so that he could serve to orchestrate the sacrifice of this Palmoni. So he plays the role of master of ceremonies, just as he did 2,888 years prior to this moment when he lambasted the religious and political influences in Israel, ultimately leading them to their humiliation and death. So either one of these two men is speaking to the Palmoni, and both know him very well. Palmoni is Yada. When we read Numbers 15, the entire story is about these three men. The bull, who is the Palmoni in this case, the ram, who is David, and the goat, who is Elijah, the prophet, who is returned for this occasion. They are God's primary three implements that fulfill the final three Moed Mikre. Palmoni has responsibility for Shabua and Teruah. Elia has shared responsibility for Teruah and Koporim. Dod is in this position because he fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bakorim previously, and his sacrifice makes Shabua possible. And he is the beneficiary of the Teruah sacrifice, and he returns on Koporim to be king of Sukkah. That would mean Dod is the man. It's amazing that someone with that responsibility, that level of compassion for his people, is so neglected by his people. So the set apart one asked this Palmoni, and at this particular case, the Palmoni is absolutely, unequivocally the Adamah Parah. He is the par, this bull. He is the bakar, this bovine that God has set in place to purge his people of their guilt so that they can receive Dod back as their king and be part of the millennial Shabbat. He's the one who intercedes. He delivers salvation. And because of what God does through his sacrifice, it is delivered in an exceptional way. And so they asked the Palmoni, this intercessor, to speak. And he would speak as an ad, a restoring witness. That is his primary mission. And he was asked now to explain what I am seeking to explain to you, which is the duration of this prophecy that we are analyzing now, pertaining to the unrelenting and overall continuance and duration, the time from beginning to end of the destructive and revolting rebellion of deadly and devastating criminal defiance. That criminal defiance against God is being manifest as Islam perpetrating Al-Aqsa Mosque 2.0, killing an unbelievable number of Jews, raping, enslaving, torturing, and tormenting them. It is being manifest by the Marxists who are chanting death to Israel. It is advanced by the Haredi, these ultra-Orthodox Jews who are just nothing but insane parasites destroying Israel. It is also of fundamentalist Christians who are reflections of their religious texts and therefore overtly anti-Semitic. And this text, as I said, goes on to say, and of this causing the set apart and the heavenly host to ponder the implications of this great subjugation and persecution. The set apart are those who were harvested on Bikurim and on Shabuah, and even on the first evening of Teruah. And they are with the heavenly host, and they're just watching the world and saying that it's just amazing how we have devolved. I spend considerable time in social media, particularly on X and Facebook, and what I see, what I read, I'm just constantly overwhelmed by the fact that humanity barely exists, that we have devolved to the point that we have no morality. Most people are ignorant, they're irrational, they have nothing to contribute. It's horrible what's happened to humankind. Well, the realization that the Palmoni, the one who intervenes and delivers salvation in an exceptional way, is being addressed as a fellow witness, as I've shared with you. He is Yada. In this case, he is not Dowd. And he is being asked to quantify the duration and extent of the period that the unrelenting will endure this revolting devastation that is so horrendous that it even causes the set apart and the heavenly host to question the implications of this grotesque worldwide persecution. Before we ponder the Palmoni's answer, let's clear up some misconceptions. As we have now come to expect, my translation differs substantially from those found in English Bibles. Most fail to distinguish between Echad Kodesh, one who is set apart, and that is absolutely what it means, and the Palmoni, which, as we know from exploring every possible route, designates the one singular and specific individual who is uniquely set apart and prepared to intervene to save, doing so in a miraculous way. But unwilling to do the same due diligence, religious publications are wont to infer that a saint was overheard chatting with another saint, when there are no saints and one phrase is clearly distinct from the other. Also troubling, once again, the preponderance of English Bibles render Ha Tamid as either the daily sacrifice or the regular sacrifice, even though Tamid doesn't speak of daily, regular, or sacrifice. Where do they get off changing the word of God? So therefore, I've chosen to render it in accordance with its full and complete etymological meanings. Additionally, there is a material difference between the way the KJV, NASB, NLT, and JPS render Kodash. And Kodash is an exceedingly common word in Hebrew. The word in its various forms, Kadesh is the verbal root and Kadosh is the noun. It means to be set apart, to be separated, to be special, to be uncommon, to be distinct. Theologians prefer to convey it using religious garb, such as holy and saints or sanctuary. Well, this is a critical mistake because there are very few things as important to our relationship with God than understanding the implications of being Kodesh, set apart. It is only when we are Kadesh, when we are separated from the norm, from that which is common, and therefore from religious, political, or conspiratorial schemes, that we have any opportunity of even knowing God, much less entering his presence. Kodesh is what makes it possible, because we are uncommon and set apart. We are Kodesh, separated from mankind's musings, and then set apart unto Yahweh, special and distinct. Further, when this instructive term is mischaracterized, becoming religious, it is turned into a false prophecy. There will be no restored sanctuary to give over to the host, tossing the faithful into the quicksand of religious toxicity. If we want to know the truth and be counted among the enduring and set apart, we need to know what the words God is using actually mean. All these things recognized, Elia, who is likely the set apart one here, once his fellow witness, singular, it's Yada and Elia at the end, to explain to those who are being tormented by this appalling cast of characters, to realize that their ordeal will be resolved. There is a happily ever ending. As I write and post on X and Facebook, the realization is that all I have is horrible, bad news over the next 8 years, but finally it's all resolved very favorably, although for very few. And that's what Elia wanted Yada to convey. And since we jumped ahead and considered Dod's answer as it is presented in the 12th chapter of Daniel, I presented that in previous programs, we recognize that the time of trouble either commences on the Shabuah of May 22nd, 2026, making this horrid experience last 7 years and 4 months, or June 11th, 2027, such that it is 6 years and 3 months long. It coincides, or concludes, I should say, on Teruah, which is September 24th, 2033, when the mortal remnant of Yisrael will return and is purged, pursuant to this specification that Dod as Gabriel laid out. At that time, we discover that the Torahless one will arrive to pursue his political objectives. This is Donald Trump now, on January 29th, 2030. And he's going to announce his religious decree on the Ides of March, March 15th, 45 days later. 33 days after that, the two witnesses will arrive, Elia and Yada, doing so on Passover, April 18th, 2030. This time, however, the question was framed differently. This is describing the entire duration of the time of trouble, because the Palmoni, one who intervenes and delivers salvation in an exceptional way, as the ad restoring witness, has been asked to quantify and explain the extent and duration of this prophecy to be properly perceived and intelligently beheld, pertaining to the unrelenting and overall continuance and duration of the destructive and revolting religious rebellion of the deadly and devastating political and criminal defiance, which is also so offensive and contrarian, and of this causing even the set apart and the heavenly host to ponder the implications of those who are trampled by this oppressor, being subjugated and persecuted. Therefore, this would be the duration of the time of trouble from the horrendous beginning to the glorious conclusion. And based upon Yeshaya's declaration in the 17th chapter of Isaiah, it must commence upon the fulfillment of Shabuah. So now, based upon the answer in the next statement, we know which promised of the Shabbat is the one that will actually begin the time of trouble, which could be distinguished from the Shabuah that will designate the Katzir harvest. Now, this will reveal the last possible date that the so-called two-state solution can be imposed on Israel as it is described in Daniel and in Isaiah. This narrowing of the nation at the waist between Gaza and what is errantly being referred to as the occupied territories of the West Bank will make Israel vulnerable and indefensible. So while the devil's advocate will rise to international prominence based upon his role in brokering this deal, it will winning a prize, a Nobel Prize, I'm sure. It will immediately trigger war. Promises will mean nothing. With millions of combatants flooding into what remains of Israel, trampling God's land and his people underfoot. The intent of this Marxist Muslim coalition will be to turn the two-state solution into the final solution to what they have come to view and promote as the Jewish problem. Well, the next statement provides the answer that we have been waiting for, and I'm going to ask you to wait a little bit longer because we've gone well past our hour time, and we will pick up at this point on Monday with our continuation of this series on the Antichrist from what will be the 4th volume of our series called Coming Home. So I thank you for listening. Good day.